Court is now in session. We're back with another episode of Fan Court. I'm your host, Sam, joined by other hosts, Ken. Ken, how we holding up today?
Pretty good. Pretty fantabulous. It's a beautiful day outside in the neighborhood.
It really is. We're getting nice little summer going on soon. I know springtime is upon us. But, our court session today, we're talking about video game consoles from the day. We got all the major ones out there. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll notice we have another section called Doubles. Whoever made this, they added duplicates of all the consoles, so we wanted to get rid of that. So we talk about all the consoles, one time here. Ken, any certain consoles that you're ready to talk about when we get to it?
I see a couple on the list. They hold a special place in my heart. That Nintendo gang, the Game Boy gang, they're very special and very fond to me. That and PlayStation, of course, but we'll get to that when we get to it.
Exactly, but we're gonna have to start with one that has to do with neither of those. It looks like the first one on our list is the Xbox Series S. Now, do you have any, do you have any attachment to the Series S?
No, none whatsoever.
I'm gonna be honest with you, neither
I
do
do
I. When it
I have
first
no
came out,
attachment.
it seemed like a dumb idea.
I mean, well, I get the concept. I see why they did it. They're trying to hit that lower end of the market share, but it's just one of those things where it's like instead of realizing there are broke gamers and not broke gamers, there are gamers who will spend the money regardless, and then there are everybody else,
Yeah.
and everybody else is not going to buy an X Series S.
Yeah, and the problem with that idea
It's forgettable.
too, yeah, it's forgettable. So I mean, like they made it digital only, which wasn't cool. But like if it's for the everyday gamer, the everyday gamer is gonna want the disc. They're not gonna want to do all that digital download stuff.
Exactly. And I just it's not a good gaming machine at all. Like not even a little bit.
No. So let's move on to a fun one here. The Sega Dreamcast.
Now that is a nostalgic console. Oh, that's an A-class console for me.
Oh yeah, A class all the way. It came up with some of the greatest series. NBA 2K was first on that. Crazy Taxi was first still on that. Like you can't beat some of the games that came on the Sega Dreamcast.
The Sonic, what was the Sonic game with the little
Chows.
chibi chow? Yes,
Sonic
those
Adventure,
things.
the
What's the
first
name of
Sonic
the game?
Adventure game.
Sonic Adventure. Listen, I clocked so many hours in that game. Freaking unbelievable. One of the best Sonic games I've played in my entire existence. And then the little VMUs that you stick into the controller.
Yep.
Oh, wonderful idea. For the time, wonderful idea.
It is
One of my
it
most
is-
favorite consoles of all time.
I was gonna say I never owned it, but I've seen so much about it. Like it's so I have to say it's nostalgic. It came out with all like some of the greatest greatest games out there, like the start of the greatest series. So you got to give it props for what it did.
I do. It's one of those. Uh, it's one of those where it could have been S class if it had a longer run, if
Mhm.
it had more titles under its belt. But it was just one of those cases where when it came out, it came out swinging, to be honest with you. But it just didn't have enough time on this planet to really cement itself as like a beloved console.
Yeah,
But it was definitely an A class console for what it was.
it definitely is.
Internet enabled, PSO online, Fantasy Star, my jam. Loved it.
It had so many great games, and it was definitely revolutionary for its time. Let's talk about the Game
No,
Boy
100%. And
Advance.
can't miss the yeah, no, I was gonna say you can't miss the 4 controller ports. That right there, in a time when everything had 2, like listen, it was amazing. It was
It
yeah.
definitely was. I know our connection might be a little off. That's why I was like, I was getting ready to roll, and then like I started to hear it. I was like, oh, all right.
Yeah, I think my connection fell asleep about an hour ago, so
It got upset, but it's all right because it knows you're going to be talking about the Game Boy Advance SP, our first Nintendo console to make it out here. Honestly, for me, like I definitely have a little more, remembrance of the Game Boy Advanced. So for me, I think this might be more of a memorable, B tier for me. I don't know. What are you thinking?
I was thinking the same thing. It's very memorable in my book, but it's not like that nostalgic of a love factor, especially with its older iterations right behind it.
Yeah, I think that. So when we get to talking those, I think it's going to be a little higher, the older iterations, but it still was a great little thing to have too.
It was. It was one of those cases where it's like it provided just enough advance in the technology front that it got more people into it. It expanded on its lifespan a good bit, but at its heart, it still was a Game Boy Advance.
Exactly. Speaking of advanced Game Boys, let's talk about the DS Lite. Or no, that's the DSi right there. What are we thinking about the DSi?
I never got that one. I never understood the concept for that one. I was a Game Boy freak. I was part of the Game Boy gang. I had the Advance. I had the original Game Boy, the Game Boy Color generation, slightly older than your generation by a decade or so. So, I got to kind of see the influx of the Game Boys in its inception, but that was one I never really got. I didn't really understand that one per se. My sister had one and she loved it. Seems to think it was the best thing since sliced bread. But I don't have very many memories of the Game Boy DS. Sorry,
The
the
DSi.
Nintendo DS. Yeah, I.
So the reason why I'm specifying DSi because the DS, which I think is on here later, or is this supposed to represent all the Nintendo DSs? 'Cause I actually don't see it on our list here. Oh no, okay, I
I
see.
think
I
this represents. No,
see.
there is one more DS, the
I see
3DS, I
two.
think.
I see two of them,
Yep, I see the 3DS looks like,
and it
and
looks like a 2DS.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
So if this is supposed to represent all the DSs, I'd give it a higher ranking. But because the image in there is the DSi, I'm going to be calling this noteworthy. If it was if it was the original DS, which I'm hoping is on here later, it'd be greater. But it's only noteworthy because it does remove a lot of the functions from the original DSs.
I don't just hate when they hamstring a console.
Yeah, so I'm giving that a noteworthy. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'll defer to you on that one. Again, I never really owned that one myself personally. My sister had it,
Fair
and
enough.
she seemed to love it. But yeah,
So Sega Genesis, our next Sega console on here. So I don't know about you,
ooh,
but I'm gonna have to. I might be a little stingy here, but I think this one would be a memorable for me.
uh-huh. What?
I think this
Really?
one's more of a memorable.
Uh, tell me your reasons why. Why is it only memorable for you?
So it's only memorable for me. Now I could be wrong, but the only game that I really know that was like hardcore Sega Genesis was Sonic the Hedgehog. I feel like everything else kind of like varied a little bit between the Sega Genesis and the SNES, which kind of makes it a little for me. Because, as much as I want to be like, yeah, like, the 6 buttons, that's great. The D pad was revolutionary, but the games itself, I feel like it was really only noteworthy for Sonic the Hedgehog in my eyes.
Ah, see, this is where my age is showing once again. So
The
in the early days, back before your time, youngin, there were two main consoles out. They were the, of
Super
course,
Nintendo and the Sega
Nintendo,
Genesis.
and then all the offerings from Sega. Well, you probably won't know. That's Sega Genesis. So they had, and I'm guessing they're lumping in all these iterations as well, like the Mega Drive, Master Drive, all that fun
Yeah,
stuff,
that's what I'm
and their little
assuming with this
attachments and everything else.
list.
Like if you grew up, yeah, if you grew up in that era when this first was a thing, it was like mind blown. It was almost like, matter of fact, the closest thing I could compare it to is if your PS5 or your Xbox Series X right now got a cloud download that enabled like graphics acceleration through the cloud or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, it like doubles my performance through an update. That's what this was. That's what these iterations were, for the Genesis generation. And for me, it was like I loved it. It didn't do much to be honest with you. It was not a whole heck of a lot that it added, but just the experience that it brought was for me very memorable.
So yeah, you would agree it would be a B.
Did I just say that?
You did. You just said it
Holy
was
crap! I
very
guess it was
memorable. So I
very
think
memorable.
I just won that one with you, considering that it's memorable.
You know what? curse you and your following of my grammar.
You see,
But
I
yes,
pay
I
attention
guess
to that. That's what you got to do. This isn't like our usual list where it's just S, A, B, C, D, and F. There's actually words on here, and if you use that word, it's gonna be your ranking for it.
versus. I'll give you that. It's very memorable.
It's memorable. I can't deny that. Like, it can't go any lower than memorable. It could have gone higher if, like I said, though, like, it's revolutionary for what it did, but it's really only noteworthy for me personally for one game.
I mean, it had a slew of games. Sonic was definitely the bread
Sonic
and
is the
butter,
thing that
kind of
draws you
how
in,
Mario was.
but, like, what exclusives did it have after that? Like, think about the Nintendo games, which we'll talk about because I see the SNES coming up later.
Oh, for sure. But I mean, come on, dude. There's like tons of other ones. I mean, you still had Mortal Kombat was a thing.
That was also on
That
SNES.
was on there as well. Um, yeah, there. But it looked better on Sega.
Fair enough. I can give you a look better. But let's move on to a Sony console, our first one, the PlayStation 2.
The PS2. I mean, anywhere less than S would be sacrilege. So
It is
it's
the most beloved console out there. If
the most.
it has to, so I'm gonna change my word note. It's the original PS2 that's the most beloved.
That's true.
Because we can talk about our next one as well, the Slim PS2. I feel like it's more of a memorable thing, not really like a nostalgic or a beloved thing. It's more memorable because it takes away a lot of the features that made the PS2 that was so great.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like honestly, it was real chinksy. Like I got the whole iteration and understanding of like smaller, slimmer, cheaper consoles when a console's been on the market for 5+ years and they've mastered the technology to make it run more efficiently, but then they package the whole thing into a slimmer, cheaper package. I get that, but
Yeah.
the PS1, which is also on this list, I think did it much better in my opinion. And for me, you know, it just it's memorable. Yeah,
Yeah,
memorable
the
at
Slim is
best.
memorable. The PS2 is always going to be beloved, and there's not really much you can say about it because, like, the PS2, like, we could talk about that for a second. Like, you played, excuse me, DVDs, you played PS1 games and PS2 games. Yeah, it was still two ports, but with all the accessories like the multi-tap and like the zap, like the not the zapper, the iToy, like it was just such an amazing console.
I mean, forget all that. The freaking library was hands down one of the best. I mean, many of the original OG titles you played on the first PlayStation, had tremendously successful sequels on PS2. I
Yep.
mean, you had the Final Fantasy series, which was amazing. Gran Turismo. I clocked so many hours on Gran Turismo, which was freaking awesome. I mean, God of War. You could just go on and on and on with like just all of the titles that Sony had under its belt even before you got into the newer generation with like The Last of Us and everybody else.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of things that were on PlayStation 2 were exclusive. You couldn't get them on anything else because if you think about it, there was no real rival in that department until Microsoft with the 360. But Nintendo kind of just started going into a whole different direction. The library alone is why every PS2 or PlayStation title period would be S class and above. But looking at just the place it holds, you know, PS2 original Fat Boy, definitely beloved. Slim, I was going to say noteworthy, but it's memorable. I can give it memorable.
I could give it memorable. I think memorable because, like, it still played all the games, but it take away a lot of features. But not gonna get into that little angry tangent because we definitely got more consoles to get into, like the original Xbox.
Now this one, this was going to have people divided. Now I was not part of the original Xbox crew when it launched. I never forget my dad tried to get me to jump on the Xbox bandwagon. He's like, hey, what do you guys want? He wanted to buy us a console for Christmas, and he's like, you can get a PlayStation, or they have this new thing called an Xbox. And I was like, well, what the heck is an Xbox? He's like, I don't know. The Rock was selling it, and I was like, The Rock? Who the heck is The Rock? Not really knowing. I didn't really watch wrestling like that. He loved wrestling,
Yeah.
but yeah, come to find out, years down the road, The Rock introduced the original Xbox with Bill Gates, and I didn't jump on that bandwagon. But for everyone that did, they were treated with a suite of beloved titles, namely Halo,
Halo was
which
the
was
big
freaking
one.
amazing. And I was so disappointed when I got on 360 and I learned I had missed out on an entire generation of gaming on the Xbox that I understood the hype. I really did. I understood the hype. Was it better than PlayStation? No, by far not at all. So for me, I would rank that as memorable.
You are
I
definitely a nicer grader than I am. You put up good reasons. I was gonna put it as noteworthy.
I can see that. I
So
can see that. The only reason I went to the memorable is that everybody that was on the original Xbox talks about the original Xbox. The fan base for the original Xbox, they will murder you in this discussion. Like that's not even I'm not even exaggerating. Like they'll go into how you could port different things to it. You can do emulation on it. You can run Windows 95 on it. You can run, Linux and all these different titles. You can get it to run PlayStation games. Like there's a whole other community of people out there that would think this was an S-class console right up there with the PlayStation. But I know better and I'm putting it at memorable.
yeah, because we'll talk about it when we get to that 360. But I feel like with we have to also incorporate kind of like yeah, it's place in history, but also what happened after it. And the 360, I think, just blew it out of the water too much, personally.
It did. It did.
But we'll talk about that later. Let's
But
talk
that's where I
about
would say,
the Wii's. We've got the Nintendo Wii
ah,
and the Nintendo Wii U right now. We'll do both of them because honestly, like the Wii for me, it's beloved.
now see, I thought about that and I was going to say beloved, but then I was going to say, it's nostalgic.
It's nostalgic. Well, I say it's beloved because it's
But
just a lot easier and it's like it was definitely more family focused and it had a lot of memorable titles on it. And the lifespan lasted forever.
it did. It did. And, the titles that were on it, I will admit, they were great. But I find myself still picking up my Dreamcast on occasion over my Wii.
All right, all right. I could get that. I play the
That's
Wii a
the only
lot.
reason why.
Well, I still play my Wii a lot because of GameCube compatibility. The
Good
titles
point.
on it is so great. And did you know that the last game released for the Wii actually came out in 2020?
I did not know that.
Yeah, they still
That's
made games
crazy.
for it going until 2020.
Then you know what? It has earned its beloved status. If they still kept it around to make games for it, it's beloved.
Yeah. The Wii U now. I'm gonna say that's obscure.
Trash.
Do you want
It
obscure?
was definitely obscure. I
Forgettable.
wouldn't say it's forgettable. It's obscure.
Cause so here's the reason why I think it's
No, I would agree with you. If you say obscure, I agree.
I'd say obscure, and it's literally
Go ahead.
because of a console we're gonna talk about in a little bit.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I would agree with the obscure. It's nowhere near the top by no means. And even when it came out, I didn't see myself wanting it. I thought, oh, that's neat. You can have the screen also in it as well. But around that time and generation, I about the graphics, so I found myself comparing the graphics to how it fared with its Sony and Microsoft counterparts. And when I learned what it was and what it wasn't, I was kind of disappointed. So I never actually got the Wii U.
That is fair. Because I mean, as you mentioned, also like what was going on with Sony and PlayStation. I mean, the PS4, which we'll talk about right now as well, that came out like a little around the same time, and like the graphics, like yeah, they were great. The PS4 had a little more going on for it. It had more to do, and like you weren't really lied to because the Wii U, they said like you're supposed to be able to connect two tablets onto it, but they never did.
Yep. It offered a lot of hype, but never delivered. In fact, it underdelivered. So in my book, yeah, I still feel like it's trash, but it's not forgettable. It's just obscure.
It's obscure, and I'll talk about my rating will be more clear when we talk about the Switch. But PS4 now, because we kind of slide into it, I think that's a good transition.
Hmm.
Honestly, I think I can't say it's nostalgic yet. I think it's memorable. I think it is definitely memorable.
I would most definitely agree. I feel like the PS4 was very memorable. Um, Not in the sense that it was terrible. It's just that it didn't have the same hype that some of its counterparts on this list had, and then I would agree with that memorable status.
And the reason also too, like it was trying to come off of a console that really flopped right before it because that PS3 like was really forgettable and really like you know really hard for gamers there too.
No, I agree. It's one of those situations where it's like it followed such a PS3 wasn't really trash. It was just one of those cases where it's such a terrible launch and then a terrible lifespan and terrible implementation that the PS4 was a breath of fresh air, but it wasn't enough at a time that it really needed to shine. So yeah, it's memorable at best.
Yeah. Um. So going from Wii U era to the Nintendo Switch era, what are you thinking about the Nintendo Switch?
So I've got three of these bad boys right now.
We've got five
Oh, look at you. See,
because we
I've
have
got a
three
family
lights
here
and
of
two
three.
regulars.
Oh, see, I've got three regulars, so I haven't gotten a light yet, but I was thinking about getting one for my youngest daughter.
Hmm.
But that should just tell you how beloved this console is in my household.
It is
My
very
girls love the
beloved.
Switch.
And the thing is, too, the reason why Wii U gets obscured for me, like, so I wanted to explain it too, because the Nintendo Switch took all the games on the Wii U and made them better.
Yes, yes. You know what? That's a good point. We're actually revisiting titles we missed on the Wii U on the Switch now because it just makes more sense.
Mario Kart 8 got over to the Switch, got better, got DLC. Donkey Kong
Yep,
Tropical Freeze got an extra
yep,
new mode. Legend of
yep.
Zelda Breath of the Wild. If it didn't make it to the Switch, it probably wouldn't be getting the sequel it's getting this year.
Exactly. Yep. So many titles that tanked along with the Wii U got a kind of a Phoenix Rising on the Switch, and I love Nintendo for it. Best decision they ever made, hands down.
Absolutely. Another decision that honestly it didn't. So sales wise, it didn't work out. But for me personally, the Nintendo GameCube, which is our next console, that is an A class nostalgia trip for me every time.
I'm with you 100% on that one.
Good because
GoldenEye, enough said.
I, GoldenEye was on the N64.
Wait, was it? Oh, you're right. I'm thinking of the wrong console. Never mind.
GameCube.
Metroid Prime,
There you go. The GameCube had so many underrated titles. That's where Luigi's Mansion started.
enough said.
Smash Bros. Melee being one of the top like
Yes,
Smash Bros. Games still out there. Mario Kart Double Dash, Mario Baseball, and Striker started on that. I still play all of those games. That's an A class for me because unfortunately the Wii will play the Wii games, which is play those Nintendo GameCube games, which is why that's beloved.
I would agree with that. That's a really good point.
Now, more Nintendo. Let's go too nostalgic here. The Nintendo Entertainment System or the NES. I feel like you'd have a better rating on it than I would, so I would let you take this away.
I might be a little biased on this one because, like I said, this was my era of gaming. So, I mean, the SNES that followed, I mean, that was my actual first console.
Hmm.
But the NES, my uncle, who was I think 10 years my senior at this point, he had one for Christmas, and we played hours and hours and hours upon hours. But he also had so, and we ended up playing that for more hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. So I did love the original Nintendo, but I feel like it was instantly outclassed by the Super Nintendo that followed it. And I'm not meaning that in just like graphics capability and game library and everything else. I mean like everything about it was super,
Yeah.
like literally. So for me, I feel like the original NES is it's definitely nostalgia. I have to give it the nostalgia factor for what it is, but I don't think it's as beloved as its next brother, the Super Nintendo. That to me is beloved. I can't name a single person who has not heard of any of the super iterations of any of the games from Super Metroid, Super Mario World, just Super Smash.
Smash wasn't even on that
All
console.
no, but I was going through the super
I
super
know.
it bled into future iterations. I mean, that's where I got my start in Street Fighter. I would spend hours and hours and hours on Super Street Fighter Uh, just as soon as I got it for Christmas, I unboxed it. It came with the game. It was just amazing. Yeah, because that exists, then original Nintendo is just nostalgic for me.
Can't blame you. Going from the original Nintendo to one of the original PlayStation ones, because this is the PlayStation one that introduced the DualShock controller that we have today, and had a portable screen on it. What do you think about that original PS1 with the screen and the new DualShock controller they did?
It was noteworthy.
I could give you that. It is noteworthy.
It was noteworthy. Um, here's my thought process on that real fast. So again, PlayStation, the original PlayStation, epic, right? We already know that's going to go. You might as well just go all the way over to where that's at on this list and just go drag that bad boy up to the S because we already know where the original OG PlayStation lies. That is the one from the startup screen, the loading screen, to just hitting that little round button and watching your lid just go in slow motion. Just everything about that was just epic. The PS1, okay, it did slim that down a good bit. It did clean it up a good bit. It did introduce a new controller, which was amazing. It did have that screen, which was useless. But that's why it's noteworthy. I mean, you get the same library. It came in at the tail end of the PlayStation's lifespan. So I feel like people that bought that didn't have the original PlayStation. So the games they were getting at the time of that's launch weren't the same games that people got when they bought the original PlayStation. Metal Gear, for example, I mean, dude, freaking epic. Again, the Final Fantasy games, freaking epic. One of my most favorite games of all time, The Legend of Dragoon. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but it's a freaking. I loved it. People say they hated it. I freaking love that game. I played it 4 times. One of the only games I played back to back to back to back to back. Once the PS1 came out, I had no desire to play that. I was looking forward to the PS2. So another one of those cases where the OG console just smashes any iteration of its slim self out of the water.
It really does. Those slim consoles really did not help these original PlayStations. And honestly, you saw I kind of made a move too if you're watching on YouTube, because I want to talk about the PlayStation 3 as well. So I want the original PlayStation 3. I can't say it's great. It was, they really fumbled that. They introduced cool titles, but that was really it. The price point was terrible, and like just kind of some of the hardware was really bad. But the original PlayStation 3 gets a noteworthy for me because it was able to play PlayStation 2 games, which kind of helped a little bit
Yeah.
out. Like it was only a select few, which is why like I can't go any higher than noteworthy. But it was able to do the backwards compatibility. But the newer PlayStation 3, that gets an obscure forgettable. I'll let you be the final decision on that because they took away the backwards compatibility. You
uh,
were really locked into only what was on PS3, and the hardware was still kind of not great.
uh-huh.
So, I mean, you want
So I
obscure
would disagree
forgettable.
with that. I would actually disagree with your rankings here, and you might hate me for this, but here's why. So I would agree with putting the original PlayStation nowhere near top class, right?
The PlayStation 3.
I would actually, yeah,
Just to clarify for
PS3, sorry,
listeners,
the
we're
PS3.
talking about the PS3 right
Um,
now.
yeah, the PS3, not the original PlayStation or PS2, PS3. So PS3, I was actually going to put at obscure.
And
Okay.
obscure.
Yes, because that's kind of what it was. If you think back to it, they had like 5 different versions. You had an 80 gig, you had a 120 gig, you had a Fat Boy, you had a with memory card, without memory card, you had a flip up top, a non flip up top, you had an internet, no internet, 2 USB, 5 USB. It was confusing, right? All in an effort to just make the price point not $1 million, right?
Yeah.
And then, at the same time, we were having issues with like the Xbox 360 and Red Ring of Death. What people didn't talk about is that PlayStation had the yellow light issue,
Yep.
and like the DVD drives would just stop reading DVDs altogether every single time. So like where, I this was the generation where I had a 360 and I loved my 360, right? Even when it red ringed, I got a new one from Microsoft and I just kept on trucking. I mean, I was on YouTube doing the hot towel trick and everything until I figured out how to like solder things down. But when I got the PS3, the original Fat Boy, it's like because so much time had passed between PlayStation 2, PS2 Slim, and the first slew of titles on PlayStation that nobody bought, it's like I didn't really care to have one. Like all the hype around Sony was killed. It killed the hype around PlayStation in my opinion and pushed it all towards Microsoft 360. Like Call of Duty on a 360, epic.
Hmm.
Of course Halo, epic. This is where PlayStation tanked it in my book, and I would put the original Fat Boy as obscure, and I would actually give the nod to the slim version, which is next on the list, and make that as memorable.
Memorable. Unfortunately, so yeah, like both consoles had their hardware issues. The only reason, like, why I'd want to give the Fat Boy a little more credibility than the Slim is, like I mentioned earlier, the backwards compatibility was supposed to be a big selling point for the PS3, and the Slims, just like with the PS2 and well, not the PS1, but the PS2 version, it takes away the backwards compatibility, which is a huge like depth step down for me because backwards compatibility, it's like you're killing your entire like collection basically, and you got to hold on to these consoles now to make sure you could play it. And so honestly for me, that's why the PS3 Fat Boy is noteworthy while the Slim is more of an obscure for me.
See, you and that backwards compatibility, my guy.
You got to love
That
the backwards compatibility.
I would agree with you on the backwards compatibility if it was a situation where I'm keeping this console in my life, like it's my current console, right?
Yeah.
If the whole purpose of backwards compatibility and in your console is that when you're on this current generation and you felt like you wanted to pick up a CD from a PS2 or an Xbox or a GameCube, whatever, you could. You can have your library sitting along with your current library, put a game in, right? That's the purpose. The problem here is, at least in my opinion, the first 3 years of the original PS3 were trash.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. They were absolute trash. So the sales weren't that great. They had a slew of problems, and everyone was stuck on modern games like Call of Duty. Nobody was playing PS2 games, right? And if you did play a PS2 game, if you were part of my camp, I still had my PS2. So my setup was a 360, a PS2, and a PS1 Slim, along with my Wii, right? And my handhelds. I didn't even put a PlayStation in my setup of that generation until the Slim came out, and that was only to play their exclusive titles. That was it. I played only exclusives on the PS3 on the Slim. I had three Fat Boys. I did not touch them at all. I still have two sitting in my closet collecting dust.
You know what? Because you actually made the best point there. And this is why I'll give it to you because it is about what the setup is and most people had the PS2, the 360 and then like another console just sitting around like that's how it was. If you wanted to play on the PS2, you'd play the PS2 games because the PS3 was doing so bad in the early life.
It was trash. It was
So you know what?
that's why the Wii did so good.
I
That
have to give it to
generation is
you.
why the Wii did so good.
Yeah, the Wii hit it right.
All
Well,
right. Next garbage fire, next dumpster fire. What do we got?
I'll take it. You don't like this one. The Xbox One. Is that the One S? I think that's the One S.
That's the original one, isn't it?
That's how you could tell it's not a great console if you can't even figure out which one it is.
Well, the original one came with the Kinect. Remember they shoehorned the Kinect in the box. You had to buy the Kinect. So this bad boy is obscure, right along the PS3.
Yeah,
It did exactly what the PS3 did. It literally copied the PS3 play for play, and that's why it gets it obscure right along with it.
yeah. I can't like it. That's Microsoft's PS3 right there.
Yep, 100%. They put in a bunch of useless things, overcharged you for it, and just nobody touched it. Nobody touched it until the end of its generation. It literally did what Sony did for the previous generation. Nobody touched that console until the Series S or whatever the small one was,
Yeah. So let's talk
and
about
they
that
redid
next
it.
one too. This one right here. This next Xbox, because that's the smaller version.
Yes, the revised, slimmer, cooler, cleaner version.
Which I still like. Honestly, not a lot of people touch that. I feel like, and like I think it does deserve a noteworthy. It's not really obscure, but it kind of still had the same problems.
It did, but see, it kind of did what the
The PS3 Slim did for the PS3.
exactly,
So
exactly. Now, I still wouldn't say it's memorable. I would
no.
still say it's noteworthy, only because it launched where the current Series S and X are today. So the reason we have a Series X today is directly because of the small success that that console had.
Yeah.
So
Well, let's
definitely
talk about
noteworthy.
something that'll be fun. The new, we'll lump it all together. The Nintendo 3DS.
Ah, the 3DS. First first handheld console I bought with my own money.
Is it really?
Yep, every other one was either traded for, gotten for me as a gift, or I found with my 5 fingers.
Hmm. So then I think you're gonna have a little more nostalgia with it than I am, because I was kind of a cheap bitch because I bought the 2DS when that came out. Uh, but it didn't take away, I think, from the greatness that the 3DS was.
So the 3DS, that was if you guys remember, there was a huge push for like 3D stuff, like back in like the early 2000s, like Avatar was a thing,
Yep.
3D movies, 3D TV. So like Nintendo tried to jump on the 3D bandwagon to the 3DS, and I was a big handheld game person. Like I said, I had the original Game Boys, I had the Game Boy Advance, I had the Game Boy Color. So I'd skipped the 3D, not 3DS, but the DS, and went into the 3DS, right? And the main reason I went to the 3DS was actually because I wanted to get a game that I thought was going to be on this console, Golden Sun. I don't know if you ever heard that game before. It was on the original Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, whatever. And I freaking love that game. And that kept me gaming until the 3DS came out. So I was not a fan of the 3D effect. I always turn that off. It made my head hurt. But the library, in my opinion, was solid. I think it was one of the strongest libraries for any Nintendo console to date. So for me, that's very. I've got a nostalgia factor for that one.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so the nostalgia factor for me too. Like the you mentioned, you hit it right on the head. The game library was amazing. Can't complain. The 3D effect, it didn't work. Don't care. But like just the DS in general was such a great thing, and when you give it such a great game library, that's what really keeps gamers going around.
I think I played Mario Kart for a solid 2.5, 3 years on that console. I
I
would just
played
pick it up and
Mario
play
Kart
Mario
for
Kart.
so long on the 2DS, which means I have to give credit for the 3DS because it is technically a 3DS game. So that's why I'm like nostalgic is a great rating for it.
It is that right there, and I think if I'm not mistaken, that Mario Kart actually brought a lot of features into the current systems and current games from that iteration.
Yeah, because the parasails, the cart customization, Metal
Yep.
Mario, but
Yep.
it was revolutionary. I'm gonna be honest with you, Ken. I don't know what this next console is. If you could see it,
No, the Sega console.
that's a Sega console.
Looks like it.
Is that the Jaguar?
Is it? Or is that a Saturn?
Ooh, maybe a Saturn. I didn't even think of the Saturn.
Ah, Sega Saturn. Yeah, that's Saturn.
Yeah, that could tell you that it's forgettable for me, considering that I didn't even know that was the Saturn.
So that one is definitely forgettable, unfortunately. I was excited when the Sega Saturn first got announced. I was a Sega person for a little bit after my time with Nintendo, only because my uncle had a Genesis and it was kind of like, oh, awesome. It's one of those fifth gen consoles where they were trying their hardest to try to move the needle as far as graphics went. But this one was very short lived. Library was trash. I think there was like a Knights thing or something, whatever. Nights into Dreams is what it was. I thought it
Yeah,
was like a Sonic port or whatever, but it wasn't. It was its own thing.
yeah, I know exactly what game you're talking about.
I actually did like that game. I actually played it. I liked it. It was great. Graphics at the time were amazing. I actually liked it, but that was about it. And then like the Virtua Fighter. I love fighting games. Virtua Fighter was about the only other one I played on that console. I didn't play anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I clearly I had no idea what that was, so that's forgettable for me.
Yep.
All right, so the Xbox Series X.
So this is going to be one where I'm going to defer to you because I don't own this console.
I actually do own this console. Do I play it as much as my PS5? No, I don't think I do. But I use it to kind of play Call of Duty. I use it to like play I use Game Pass. Like it's a really cool thing. The Controller feels amazing. The power is great, and it has decent memory. I do need to get the external. I got to get more memory for it though, because like they really kind of like this generation of consoles really screwed me out of memory. But the console is great. You could play 360 games, you could play Xbox One games, you could play Series X games. It's such easy setup. Like if you want to stream off of it, you just plug it in and you're done. I love it. Do I want to give it an A ranking? No, because honestly, it's not doing anything revolutionary for me. It's kind of just bringing the games back from like the dead, like it's reimagining some of the old games. So I think it's more of a memorable grade for me. Personally, like I said, it's a great console to have. I would recommend it, but it's just I feel like just for what it is, it's a memorable console.
See, you'd be better than me. I would say noteworthy.
Noteworthy.
Yeah. The only reason being is because I mean you can keep them memorable, but I feel noteworthy because A, nothing in this generation could be memorable.
That is fair. Like there's not no console in this generation, which honestly that could affect a little bit. But I think just for kind of some of the other stuff it provides, like it's more streamer friendly, it's more like interactive, and like this is also more introduction of crossplay as well. This with this generation, which I think is makes it a little more like yeah, but it's not anything revolutionary.
I can agree with that. So I would give it the B. It'd be memorable. I feel like past this generation, it would be memorable.
Yeah,
Like once we move into the next generation, I'd say, yeah, I can look back on the Series X with fond memories.
that's pretty much
Unlike our next console.
yeah the Atari.
Yes.
Why don't we just jump right in? I'm not even going to continue on. I could continue on about the Xbox Series X when we talk about the PS5, but let's talk about the Atari. This thing almost killed the gaming industry, but also had a lot of good titles.
It did. So this was probably, the first real, mainstream console, I would say,
Yeah,
that people remember. There were tons of other ones. He's got it as a YouTube video where he ranks like every single console, and there's like hundreds of consoles. This was like at the tail end of like the experimentation phase or whatever. So for me, I never had one. Nobody in my family ever had one. This definitely predates my existence by far. But from everything I've heard and seen and learned about it, I would say it was very noteworthy.
yeah, I think so too. I used to have like like those like mini consoles like that they've been doing recently, where they have like all the games on it.
Yeah.
I had a mini console of this one, and I'm like, all right. I mean, it's cool, but that's it. It's cool.
I mean, yeah. If you look at like the games that were in its catalog, a lot of those games are like on people's phones now, and not ranking this according to today's standards or anything like that, but
No,
just
we're
ranking
trying.
it according to its own standards. I mean, Tetris, Pong,
Yeah,
Galaga,
I mean, Tetris was also done better on the Game Boy too,
very true.
which we'll talk about in a little bit.
All
Before
right,
we get to the Tetris console, let's talk about the Xbox 360.
most epic console of all time.
Yeah, yeah,
I kid, but honestly, this console was probably the one. Well, no, not probably. It cemented Microsoft as a gaming monolith.
it did.
There's no question about that. I mean, the 360. I own this, and about 4 or 5 different iterations of it. That's how much I love the 360. And it wasn't just because I was a fanboy or anything like that. Because I wasn't. I owned a PlayStation, original PlayStation, a PS1. I owned an original PS2, a PS2 Slim, and I attempted to buy a PS3, but then I ended up sticking with the Xbox 360 for a number of reasons. One, the library was awesome. Two, the online play.
Mm-hmm.
3 through a million, the online play. This was by far the only reason to own a console in the early 2000s. Like that the mid 2000s or whenever this came out, it was online play. I had like Waka Flocka and DMX on my friend list. Like not even kidding you. And just that alone, being able to play with other people and like jump online, put your little avatar guy out there, have like your point systems and everything, and all those different things you could have. S class, beloved, all the way, hands down. It is the sole reason for online play today. I would even say the 360's online play is still 5 times better than Nintendo's online play, and at least twice as good as Sony's current online play.
Yeah, I like that gold membership really like that was my first introduction to online gaming, which, like I said, that has to give it so many points, and like the games on it were amazing. Halo 3 was probably my favorite online game to play. It started Gears of War. It had such an immersive like console. It had so many great titles that probably wouldn't be around, without it. And that's like, honestly, for me, that could be a beloved console.
all day long. And then come on, what other console was doing like? Have you seen the Gears of War console edition, the Call of
Yeah.
Duty edition? Come on, the Halo edition?
And considering
Come
that
on.
when they started that trend, it's still going on. They still do that.
Yeah, exactly. That, as far as I know, they started it.
Yeah.
I didn't see any other cool specialized colorware versions of any other console until this. I mean, they had like a white PS2, I think, and maybe a red PS2, but that was it. Not like one that was like decked out, all dripped out with like Call of Duty swag and Gears of War swag. Halo with the little green and the gold and the oh, dude, oh.
Yeah, those like limited edition consoles were so cool.
I still fetch that like almost asking price, almost full retail for those consoles when I sold them on the marketplace,
Hmm.
like 10 years later, that I wish I hadn't sold them.
Yeah. Speaking of stuff you probably shouldn't sell anymore, the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, and the Game Boy Color. We'll lump them together. Uh, since you have probably more fond memories, why don't
So
we
matter
let
of
you
fact,
take it?
so let's just go ahead and just lump all three of these bad boys together before we jump into the Sega and then the two PS handhelds, right?
Yeah, all right.
So Game Boy is an entirely different category all by itself, right? It's handhelds, okay? And Nintendo has, is, and will always murder the handheld sector.
Oh yeah.
The only thing that gives Nintendo a run for its money right now is your phone.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the only thing. Your phone. Gaming on phone murders every single console on this list 5 times over, right? Because it's easy, it's convenient. That's another conversation. But Nintendo and what it did with the Game Boy Color, and in my opinion, the Game Boy Advance, is it brought true console gaming. I'm not talking about like the graphics or anything like that, but just the experience itself. It brought true console gaming to your pocket. And I mean, going to school, having that big plastic thing in your backpack, getting on the bus, whipping out your Game Boy Advance, just anywhere that you were in the world, you could whip out your Game Boy and play a full blown title. Like I said, I played Golden Sun and Mario Kart, for hours and hours and hours. Zelda for hours and hours and hours. Freaking Pokemon, dude, hours and hours and hours. I put more time in on these three consoles than any other console on here combined. All three are S. They're all three are beloved. I would drive to your house, knock on your door, pull out a stick from your own yard, and beat you with it. With any of these consoles, anything below S.
No, I have to agree. Like there were days too. I remember when I was younger, I wouldn't even turn on the home console just to play Pokemon on the Game Boy. And while lying in bed or
Yeah,
like outside with friends. Like these consoles are just so great.
dude, I still have the little light attachment that plugs into the Game Boy Advance because it didn't have a backlit screen.
I know.
So when they had the one that came out with the backlit screen, I was like, God, I can play in the dark.
Dude, those consoles are so great.
Freaking amazing.
Can't even beat them. Something we can beat, the Sega handheld. I don't even remember the name of that.
That was a Game Gear, wasn't it?
Was it the Game Gear?
I think so. I think it was the Sega Game Gear.
Let's see. For me, that was yeah, it's the Game Gear. That's honestly obscure. It's an obscure one.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Actually, no, I'll actually give it a worse. It's forgettable.
All right, you know what?
And
I'm with it. I'm trying to be
because
the nicer grader for once.
no. See, this wasn't even obscure because in the time when it did come out, it actually would have been great, right? And it would have been in that obscure zone because it did kind of the same. It committed the same sins as the Wii, the PlayStation, and the Xbox Series X. It threw everything in it but the kitchen sink, right?
Yeah.
And thought, yeah, this is what people want. They want a fat boy console in their hands with awesome graphics, color screen, backlit screen, customizability, whatever, all these different things, right? It was a much better console than the Game Boys at the time, right? But they did all that with the detriment of poor battery life,
Yep.
small game catalog, freaking not as portable as a Game Boy. So it's kind of like all the reasons you would have a portable console were out the window because of what it was. So in my opinion, it was forgettable. Like as
Yeah.
soon as the Game Boy Advance comes out, it's like nobody's even thinking about a Sega handheld. I forgot about it, and
Yeah.
I owned one.
I mean, I didn't even say what it was. Like, I'm pretty sure I had. There's one at my parents' house, but I didn't even know.
Yeah, no, it's forgettable, my book. I'm pretty sure some people have some fond memories of it, but no. What handheld Sega console comes after this?
No Sega. We've got the three
Exactly.
PlayStation consoles going on next, though.
No, I actually mean like in history. Like,
Oh,
what's
in
the next
history,
Sega
no,
handheld
that killed
console?
it. No, none of those. None of
That
those.
that that killed it. Exactly. That's my point. That killed it.
Well, let's talk about those PlayStation handhelds there. Honestly, I'd give it two obscures and a noteworthy. The PSP would be the noteworthy.
Yeah, no, I would have to say the two PS Vita options were obscure. They
Well,
still are obscure.
actually, one of them was a PSP Go, which made it sliding, and then it was a PSP and a PS Vita. Now, the Vita died real quick with nothing going for it. The PSP Go was just honestly like a worse version of the PSP. And then the PSP really didn't provide much. I mean, yeah, it was cool that it could play DVDs, but that was really it.
So, okay, I might have to mix this one up a little bit. So the PSP Go, that's definitely obscure. I don't
Yeah, that's
honestly I
that,
forgot that existed. So I
that's
would have given it
obscure.
forgettable, but that I'll give it obscure. The PS Vita, I would say, would be noteworthy.
All right.
I would actually give it a little bit more of a noteworthy status, right alongside the PSP. I would have given the PSP a memorable, but it's not really memorable either.
It's not like, not a lot of people think about those PSPs anymore. Like when you think handhelds, you're going immediately to Nintendo.
Exactly. Nobody really points out the Sony handhelds, and I think the biggest reason why it didn't do as well as it could have done is it didn't deliver on the promises that it gave us when it launched, right?
Yeah.
The games looked awesome. I give it that. Playing Gran Turismo on your PSP was still awesome, but that game took like years and years and years to come out. Um, they were offering you could play it as a handheld on your game, kind of like a la Wii U, which that didn't come for a while. And then they also at some point offered the ability to like continue play of certain games on the handheld console, which again didn't launch at all, right?
Which
It,
one,
it
for the
might be launched
Vita
now. I'm
or for
not
the
sure.
PSP?
The Vita.
So for the Vita, that one did launch because I remember I was playing MLB The Show on my home console, and then I switched it over when I would
Hmm.
have to go out for road trips.
But it wasn't one of the launch features, was it?
No, that came
It might
out.
have been.
It was supposed to be a launch feature, but I think it messed up, so they had to. Because that was also the time that the PlayStation Network was down.
That's what I thought. I don't remember that being part of the launch feature that it had, which is one of the main reasons why I wanted one was to, get that PS3/4 whatever experience on a console and then be able to take it to go. And I was again, I was a Sony fanboy, so I wanted to root for it because I love Sony so much, and I had a PSP, but it just didn't deliver the way I thought it would, and it just kind of killed it for me.
That is fair. Honestly, it really they really kind of dropped the ball with that one.
And is it still around? Did they replace it yet? Does it
N-
have a replacement?
No, they have completely given up on handhelds.
That's what I thought. But it did last a good almost a decade, I thought.
No, I think it died like 2018, 2019,
2018. But it came out in like 2008, right?
2013, I believe.
2013?
Hold on, let's quick Google search before we move on. Let's see.
Do the
P-
Google.
PS
So I think it came out in like
Vita
2010 or something like that.
lifespan 2011 to 2019.
I was close.
Yeah,
8 years.
So talking about PlayStation when they gave up on the handhelds and really focused on home console, the PS5.
PS5. Now this one right here, I would have to say I'm this close to putting it in the beloved status, but I can't.
Hmm.
I can't put it in beloved status. And it's not yet nostalgic, so I can't even put the nostalgia factor on it yet. But I think that this console, even right now, is definitely memorable.
Yeah, I couldn't give it anything bigger because of the issues it had when it first launched. It's becoming more accessible, which is making it great. But that was definitely like a big hindrance for me was the accessibility of this console.
Yeah, the price gouging, the, limited supply issues, all that jazz. It kind of started with the same sins as the PS3, where it's just non-existent for a while. Like you can't really enjoy it for like the first couple years of its lifespan.
Yeah,
But it bounced back a lot quicker. It is super solid. It's got a really solid library of games. The online is amazing. And the way people play it right now, it's kind of like it's one of those consoles where, in the next few years, it's going to have a solid library of games, and it'll be still in people's uh living rooms in the next 5 to 10 years.
it
We'll
will,
be popping
especially like it.
PS5 open to play Last of Us.
It's definitely going to be a big one that sticks around.
So yeah, I'm cool with the memorable status.
Me too. You ready to rapid fire the next two Xboxes here?
Let's do it.
All right, slim version of the first Xbox and a revamped version of the 360. What are you thinking?
So actually, both of these are slim versions of the 360. So going back to the
Oh, I
how
didn't even know that was
awesome
a
the 360
360.
was,
Oh, that is a
yeah,
slim. All right.
yep. So how awesome the 360 was, and how well beloved it was, and why the original 360 earned its beloved status, is that it spawned not one, not two, but actually three different iterations of smaller console. So we've got two of them here, and they've got the first one is the little angular looking one, that slim one, and then the second one is like a super slim or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of slightly smaller.
Yeah.
But what it did is it knew it had to kind of prolong its current lifespan um as much as it could, in preparation for the launch of the next console. So I give it, the Angular one, I would say, is memorable. I wouldn't give it an S class. It's
No?
definitely memorable. Yeah.
Okay, we'll bring it down.
Um, no, 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 not that one.
Oh, the other one.
Not that one. Yeah, the other one.
We'll put this
Okay,
one
it's
back.
memorable. Uh, Mostly because you have the same access to the library. Now you're able to buy a console that you have no fear of red ringing on you, and at the same time, it's also introduced more storage options. A cleaner profile, some really badass, awesome custom versions of itself. You know, Controller upgrades. The new dashboard that came in along with it, like the original OG Xbox got that dashboard as well, but it really leaned into it with this Xbox. This is the one that was supposed to be before. So it still gave you a lot of time in the 360 generation with this console. So I would definitely say it's memorable for that reason. Now, its younger brother, not so much. I actually would think he's forgettable.
You think this one is forgettable?
Forgettable.
Well,
And I'll
I
tell you why.
was gonna say I just called it an original Xbox, so that can give you everything you need to know.
There you go, right there. You thought this was the original Xbox, but it's not. If you look closely, this has the same pattern as the Xbox One that followed it.
Yeah,
And what they were trying to do was trying to eke as many sales out of the 360 as possible by reintroducing this newer, smaller, slimmer, cleaner, lighter Xbox that looked like its bigger brother, the Xbox One. It didn't work.
yeah.
So I forgot about it.
I mean, I called it something else, so it's clearly forgettable.
There you go.
Something that is never going to be forgettable for me: the N64. This was my first console ever.
Oh man, now I feel old.
Do I think it's beloved? Honestly, no, because the controller was kind of wonky and it never felt right, but the library was amazing. I honestly want to, as much as I want to be like, oh, it's so beloved, I feel like it's more of the nostalgic for me.
It definitely was. It has a nostalgia factor for me. I always said it's memorable. I get the warm fuzzies when I think of N64. GoldenEye. This is GoldenEye. This
This was
I do love
GoldenEye.
GoldenEye. And yep, that I do love that. And then oh my God, now I'm mixing them up. Was Mario Sunshine this or GameCube?
GameCube. This was Mario 64.
Ga- I played Mario Sunshine. I love Mario Sunshine. You know, I got to get because I had a GameCube. I never owned a 64. That's probably why I'm mixing these up. I owned a GameCube, but I did get a chance to play GoldenEye from a friend. We played. I love that freaking game. I love that game. But yeah, for me, it's memorable. I'll give you the nostalgia factor since you owned it.
Yep.
But
I currently own
yeah,
it. We got a new one. We got my girlfriend gave me one for Valentine's Day, not this previous year, the year before
awesome. What a great spouse you have.
it. Let's talk about some other consoles here. We got two more left. Let's talk about the 2DS.
Did not own it. That's
All
the
right.
one you owned, I thought.
That's the one I
I'll let you
own.
handle that one.
Honestly, I'd probably give it a memorable. I mean, like, it didn't do anything revolutionary. It was a cheaper version of the 3DS. It allowed you to play the games, but I can't
Hmm.
say it's nostalgic. I have to say it's memorable because it's like, yeah, it was there, but like, you're not gonna go back and be like, yeah, that 2DS was so much better. Like, no, it cuts out some features that the 3DS had. So I mean, that's gonna be a memorable all the way.
I would definitely agree with that. For me, I mean, I skipped it because again, I'm looking at Game Boy Advance, all
Yep.
those guys, and then roll into the 3DS, and I'm like, nah, I just don't see any point for the 2DS
It was just a cheaper version,
with the same games.
pretty much. So
So
let's round out our list here of consoles and let's talk about the Virtual Boy.
I'm actually surprised this is even up here because I forgot this existed.
I did
I
not.
literally forgot this existed.
It definitely gave a lot of headaches because everything was just red and black, but it is definitely forgettable. But for what it, based on what it was originally, it's forgettable. Based on what it helped lead to, it's obscure because the VR technology is definitely used today. But this thing did. I don't even think people even thought about this when they were making VR.
Oh no, 100%. I mean, if they did reference this, awesome for it. If they didn't, awesome for it because I remember the commercials for this guy, and I remember ads and the price tag and all kinds of stuff, and it was just one of those things where it's like I just when it came out, there's no point, right? So I would be a little bit more kind than forgettable, and I would say obscure.
Yeah,
Um, but only because I feel like where we are now with like Oculus and PS, the PlayStation's virtual, and a couple other people that are out there now, it's like I do feel like a lot of where they got their ideas and inspiration stemmed from this
Virtual
bad boy
Boy.
here. Yeah, and not so much because they feel like, oh, that's where the direction we're going, but more so because this laid the groundwork for what not to do,
Hmm.
right? They learned from the sins of their fathers and they bettered it because of it.
They
So
did, and
I'd say
so
obscure.
I think obscure is good too.
Well, look
Well,
at that. That's the end of our
that's
list.
the end of our list. Do you have any objections to anything we've done so far?
No, I think we've got a pretty solid list here. I think we've got the ones that are forgettable are forgettable.
Yeah.
I think the only one that I might give a little bit more grace is the that Series S down there, the
Honestly,
Xbox
so
Series S.
as we kind of discussed it, like I kind of agree with you. The Series S might be a little more than forgettable. I think it's. I don't know if I want to say it's noteworthy. I think it might be more of an obscure thing because it lets you play the Xbox Series X, but you can't use the disc for it. But that could also be just like an obscure idea because remember, also PS5 has a digital only version too.
Correct. Now, see, so the only reason I'm saying I'm rethinking the forgettable status is because honestly, I think more people buy the S than they buy the X
Yeah.
at this point because of the price tag. So I would say obscure, and here's my reasoning why. The way it does things is that the game that you have in essence is an Xbox Series X game, right? But you have the ability to run that game at lower spec on the S. So you can still pop in any game S or X, but you're getting less performance. You have no uh uh storage options really other than, what you have. You don't have a physical disk. So if you don't get the right flavor, when you start, you're either having to upgrade down the road or you're going to be hitting storage caps. And then, it's not as great a console as the X. So if you're hip to the game, if you're a gamer, you are constantly aware that your game's not running as good as it could be on the X, while also having to be constantly aware of your store's limitations, right? So for me, it can't be anything past obscure. But I don't think it's quite forgettable because I do think that right now there are more S's in the wild than there are X's.
Yeah, honestly, I'm fine with that. I mean, it doesn't run any disc, which is definitely a huge downgrade, but I think obscure is a fair rating for it.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. Those was that Saturn, the Game Gear, and then that wonky Xbox. Yeah, those are forgettable. I would forget
Yeah.
about those guys.
Alrighty. Well, I think with that, court is adjourned. As always, I hope you guys like and subscribe. Make sure you keep up. We'll be here every Saturday. Anything to take us out before we adjourn for the night?
Yeah, I'm actually ready to go whip up my Virtual Boy and play some Virtual Boy.
Mario Tennis.
I
That's
don't
where
have
the
one of those
first Mario
guys.
Tennis was.
Was it really? I can definitely see that.
It was. Well, with that, we will see you guys next time.
Bye, everyone.